Good morning, Crossing Church. I'm Jonathan Cassiebaum. I'm one of the pastors here. Welcome. If you're a guest, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for spending your morning worshiping with us. Doing 3 songs before I get up here is actually very challenging for me. So, I don't think I'm going to cry this time. That's not my plan. It's never really my plan. I just kind of watching Barry kind of deal with that. I mean, like all of us, if you're like me, I cringe in my seat because I hate awkward. And, I'm like, oh, Barry, I'm so sorry. But then it's like, man, it's so much gospel. It's so pure because it's like, yeah, hey, man, we've been, running around trying to get things together. And, I prayed this morning for the worship team. I'm like, man, they put out so much service, so much time during the week, prepping and all this. For what? For that, right? Like, for you, right? So that we can come in, for me, so we can come in here and we can be moved and feel that we are in the presence of God, that we can actually reflect and think about these truths, and that's them. That's them doing that. I mean, obviously, God through them, but anyway, God is just good, and it's so much fun coming here on Sundays and worshiping God with y'all. So before I get started, let me pray. Father, we thank you so much for giving us a chance to gather here. I thank you for preparing our hearts for your word. And I ask this morning that you would do just that you would help us to receive this, that you would allow your word to pierce through our hardened hearts, that you would allow us to come to you honestly on our knees and just ask for forgiveness, for guidance, that we know that you love us, Father, and we want to live obedient and faithful lives to you. And so this morning, Father, I pray that you would help each one of us, that you would speak to us where we're at, whatever circumstances we're going through, that you're powerful enough, and that you're willing, that you're able, and that you care for us deeper than we actually care for ourselves. In the name of your Son we pray. Amen. So last week, we were picking up Mark chapter 9. Last week we talked about what is this faith. And we saw Jesus have an interaction with a father who asks Jesus to heal his son. And what we end up reading is, I believe, help my unbelief. Right? This doubting, this father who came with faith, but then when the circumstances arose and the disciples couldn't heal his son, these doubts started rising up, right? And Jesus explains to us what faith actually looks like and what it means to actually trust in God. And then we see that the disciples demonstrate their threat to faith, right, which was their pride. And they started going, yeah, I got this gift of exorcising demons, and I'm going to do this on my own, and thanks for the gift, God. You can move to the side. I got this. And they found out that they were powerless without him. And so we see that our pride and ourselves really get in the way of trusting in God well. Well, this morning what we're going to see is Jesus is going to flip, and now he's going to go to the positive side of this, and he's going to say those are the hindrances to faith. This morning and next week we're going to see, what does faith actually tangibly look like in our lives? And this morning what we're going to see is, specifically we're going to talk about service, that faith is service. We should have a servant's heart. And I'm going to say this over and over today, and so I want to say it out front, and I want you guys to think about that. Do you have a servant's heart? Okay? Next week we're going to talk about sacrifice. So, heads up, they're not going to be fun, great, encouraging. I mean, it's encouraging, but it's also very challenging for us to read through the scriptures and allow this. And that's why I prayed, I want this to pierce into your hearts the same way it's piercing into my heart as I prepare for this and experience this as I come up here and just kind of watch the Holy Spirit work. So that's where we're going this week and then next week. And so we're picking up. We're going to be in Mark chapter 9. If you've got a Bible, feel free to open that, turn it on. We'll have the slides up that'll have the verses as well. We're going to be picking up in Mark chapter 9, verse 30. All right. It says, they went on from there and passed through Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he is killed, after 3 days he will rise. But they did not understand the saying and were afraid to ask him. Okay. I failed to put a map up, and I just realized as I was reading that. So they were up in Mount Hermon, the Transfiguration. They came down. They were in Capernaum. And remember, we talked about last week, he's on his path to the cross right now. Like, this is the transition point. Actually, I think when BJ preached was the actual transition point of where Jesus now is moving towards these prophecies of what's going to happen to him. And this is the second prophecy we read. There's going to be 3 of them. Joey's going to end up preaching on the third one. And so the first one, he says, hey, there's going to be suffering. There's going to be rejection for the Son of Man. I'm going to die, right? And that was transforming to them. That's not what they expected of their Christ, the Messiah. Well, now what we read is that it's a little bit different. He actually says that he's going to be delivered into the hands of men. That delivered, that's betrayal. That's what that is. That's handed over, right? So he's like, same things are going to happen. I'm still going to die, but this is how it's going to happen. And then we're going to see in the third one, he's going to expand a little bit more when we get into Mark chapter 10. And so what we're seeing is that Jesus is constantly he's kind of giving this to them in bite-sized chunks, right? Like they can't really handle the full thing. And so he's like, hey, by the way, this is rejection and suffering is this path. And they're like, it's not really what I was thinking. I was kind of thinking kingdoms and gold and nice chariots and whatever, right? And now he says, not only is that going to happen, not only is it going to be rejection and suffering, but I'm going to get handed over. I'm going to get betrayed. And that's deep, right? And the disciples are like, oh. And what it says here, and we saw this when he came down from the Transfiguration, he's spending time with his disciples. It says he did not want anyone to know where they were at, right? For he was teaching his disciples. And he's teaching them what? This path, this road, what we come up here and teach, what we read in the Bible. He's teaching them what a life of faith looks like. What does it look like to actually trust in God? And so we see, again, Jesus' compassion for his disciples, that he's taking them together and he's like, let me explain what's about to happen. It says in verse 33, and they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, what were you discussing on the way? But they kept silent, for on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. And he sat down and called the 12. And he said to them, if anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. And he took a child and put him in the midst of them. And taking him in his arms, he said to them, whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. And whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me. So here they are. They're cruising down this mountain, right? They're actually down the mountain already. They're traveling to Capernaum, and they go to some house. And on the way, Jesus is overhearing them. And I think back to we used to live in Vegas a few years ago, and we'd go hiking and lots of camping and stuff like that. And I remember we'd be hiking, and usually the picture, if I can remember, would be me up front, walking, hiking, and the kids behind complaining about where we were going and whether we were there yet, right? They were it was 6 years ago. They were younger. And I that's the picture I see here. Here's Jesus, he's walking, he's like, okay, and we got to go here, right? And he hears behind them what? He hears them arguing. I don't know. We've all heard our kids argue. I don't think I need to outline what that looks like or what that sounds like. But I would imagine that Jesus, who has just spent this time pouring into the disciples, teaching them and explaining to them everything, and then this. And he's just like, you got to be kidding me, right? And it said, and he asked them, what were you arguing about? And it says they kept silent. So remember, they don't answer him. And they don't ever answer, which is interesting. Because that was enough, right? Jesus asked the question, and they're like, got it, boss. Right? They don't answer. It says they keep silent. The only reason we have what was going on was because Peter was there, Peter was with them, and Peter's explaining this story to Mark to write it down. So that's how we get this story. And I find it kind of interesting that it doesn't name names, it doesn't accuse, right? Like our kids tend to do, right? In these arguments, it's just we're just arguing over who's going to be the greatest. It seems like there's a lot more to that. And I'm not going to read into Scripture. I don't know what all they were arguing, but I think that's probably sufficient for us to understand that was not probably the conversation Jesus was hoping they were having. I think we could probably all give that, right? But they're arguing about who's going to be the greatest and why. What was the construct, right? If you remember, so last week, 3 of the disciples, Peter, James, and John, went up on the mountain and witnessed the transfiguration of Jesus. The other 9 were down below, failing at exorcising a demon. When those 2 crowds clash on the way back, if you're in the group that was up on the mountain, you're probably like, what up? I'm in the top 3, right? And the other 9 are trying to figure out, maybe he doesn't like us. Maybe we're almost out. Maybe we're going to get kicked off into Survivor Island, or you know what I mean? What happens next? And so there's probably a lot of ego. I know there would be if I was one of them. I know there'd be a lot of ego and a lot of pride of going, well, where do I stack up? Where am I in this? I don't think they were so obtuse as to think that they were Jesus was in the mix of comparing themselves to who's the greatest. I think they understood that Jesus was altogether separate. I think the who is the greatest was within the 12. And they were saying, I don't know. I'm definitely in the top 3. I don't know if I'm 2 or if I'm obviously in the 9, the bottom 9 because, I didn't go up on the mountain. But look at what Jesus does here. And so this is the arguments. And it says that Jesus sat down. I had half a mind to sit while I preached, but I don't think I can physically. But he sat down, and he took this humbling position, right, to set the stage for what he was about to explain to him. And it says that he called the 12 to him. He said, if anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. And how many times have we heard that? I've heard that a lot. And here's the thing. It's tough because we're okay not being first. I'm okay with being second. 5th. 50 out of 5,000 is pretty good. Right? What number becomes not good? You see where I'm getting at with this? We're okay not being first, I think, and I hope. But we want to be up there. Deep down, there's a sense of pride and ego in us that says, pretty decent. I'm okay. But what Jesus says here is we need to be last. Not even second to last. There's nobody else who's going to be behind you, just you. Are you willing for that? Are you good with that? I don't think any of us are, quite truthfully. But that's what he's saying. It says, and he took a child and put him in the midst of them, and taking him in his arms, He said to them, "Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me." So he's in this house. We don't really know whose house. He's just in some house in Capernaum. But you could imagine, right, they're in a very domestic environment. There's probably kids running around. We've all had a Bible study. I'm sure we've all experienced this, right? And he grabs one of the kids, and it says he takes him into his arms. And he says, "Whoever receives a child like this receives me." Now, let me explain that. So that word "receive" it's kind of, like, that's a tough word. It's a weird word in that context, because you go, man, what do you mean? I think if I were Jesus and he said that, I go, qualify receive for me, please. Can you just put a little more meat on that? And what he's saying, and that word is like, think of it as like a hospitality. It's like a reception desk. It's like taking responsibility for, taking ownership of. I would actually liken that to like, probably like a hotel, right? If you think like bed and breakfast, right? The people that run that place kind of become your servants. And that's the idea, right? It's like, hey, somebody walked in. Doesn't matter who they are. I'm going to serve them. And he says you need to do that with a kid. I've got 3 lovely daughters here, you know. How do you serve a kid? How do you serve a child? You know, and don't run down the thing of like, well, I provide for them, and I throw food, and I got them a bed and shelter. Sure, good job. But how do you serve them? You see, a child is the most difficult to serve because they take you for granted. Probably won't say thank you. In fact, you'll probably do something and spend a lot of time preparing it and getting it ready, and you unveil it, and they're like, that's cool. And you're like, what? No, come back. I need more. I need more of a reaction from you. Right? Who's been there? I mean, like, is that not every Christmas, birthday? I mean, they are the hardest to serve. Why? Because you don't get anything back. And oftentimes you get the opposite of what you want back. I mean, at least to another adult, they'd actually have the courtesy to say, thanks, that means a lot. I'll throw that in the garbage when I get home. But at least to your face, they're kind. But the innocence of children, they'll be like, why'd you give me this? Well, I thought you'd like it, but I guess not. So Jesus is using a child here to replicate, like, who is the most difficult to serve? Who do you need to be last behind? You need to be willing to even serve a child. You need to be willing to serve somebody who isn't going to give you anything back. So let me ask you this. Who are you willing to serve? Who meets the threshold of service in your life? See, because what Jesus is saying here is a faith, the faith that he was talking about, that we talked about last week, that faith means that we serve everyone. Everyone. So, you guys know I'm preaching to me too, right? I mean, like, I hope you guys get this. Who do you not serve? Who do you not want to serve? Who's got that personality that is just hard to serve? Right? Like a kid, right? Who takes you for granted? If we're supposed to be last, if we're supposed to serve everyone, that's everyone. Everyone. You know, and I think ultimately it comes back to exactly what the disciples were arguing about. Who's the greatest? We always are like on the upside of that, trying to think of like who we're better than and all of this. And instead, where we should be is trying to figure out who all we need to serve and who we haven't done a good job of serving. I mean, who is it in your life who won't repay you for your service? Not because they can't, but because they won't. You know somebody like that? If I serve this person, they're just going to consume. They're just a consumer. And they're not going to pour back into me ever. Yeah, you got to serve those too. Why? Because you need to consider them better than yourself. Right? This is tough. But this is what Jesus is saying. This is what this service looks like. This is what faith looks like. And if you have a servant's heart, that's what we should be aspiring for. We're never going to get it perfect, but we should be pursuing that. All right, we're going to pick up in verse 38 here. And then John said to him, "Teacher, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he was not following us." But Jesus said, "Do not stop him, for no one who does a mighty work in my name will be able soon afterward to speak evil of me. For the one who is not against us is for us. For truly I say to you, whoever gives you a cup of water to drink because you belong to Christ will by no means lose his reward." So now we get into the second part of what this service looks like. The disciples. I read this stuff, I'm just like, come on, guys. But I know that I would have been doing the exact same thing, right? It is a quick side note here. After the first prophecy, what did Peter do? He fought Jesus, right? And he totally had misunderstood and went the wrong path, right? And it details Peter kind of not getting that. Well, after this one, now it's John, right? And actually after the third one, we're going to see the disciples kind of do it again. And so it's almost this contrast that Mark is giving of here's Jesus with this prophecy, and then Peter loses his mind. And then, John loses his mind here. But look we saw someone casting out demons in your name. And we tried to stop him. We tried to forbid him. Tried. They were unsuccessful. Matthew actually makes it even more clear. They tried, but it didn't work. Imagine this, right? Here are the disciples. We don't know when this is, right? This is kind of a past tense statement, so we don't know really when this occurred. But so here's the disciples. They see some guy who's going, "In the name of Jesus, demon, leave this man," right? And they jump in and they go, no. Stop this. You're not following who? What does it say? Did you guys read that? You're not following us. Just give me a second here. There's you're not following us, right? I can't even believe that the disciples would say something like that, and yet I think that's so pervasive in our thinking, right? We may not say it, but we think that a lot. So I need to kind of move on because I'm not going to. So he's like, man, so the disciples try to stop this guy, and they fail at it, and the demon comes out of this individual. We don't even know who this is, and they're mad at him. What do you think the guy that just got healed is thinking? Really? You're mad? This dude just saved my life, and you're mad at him? It's absolutely ridiculous. But the disciples are so ingrained in this culture of greatness. And they're not getting what this service
looks like. And so what they're doing is they're becoming the Pharisees that they hated. Right? They're like, no, you don't do it like that. That's not how you serve God. That's not how you serve people. You need to follow us, right? You need to become, like, let me put up these rules. Let me protect, right? They're becoming the exact Pharisees that Jesus has just spent the last 8 chapters in Mark condemning. And why? Why are they becoming like that? Because they're concerned about who's the greatest. They don't have that servant's heart. And what Jesus says is, no, you don't understand. Whoever's not against us, man, if somebody, and Matthew actually even goes into it in more detail, and he goes, man, if somebody is casting out in my name, what's wrong with that? Like, let him go. He's a believer, obviously, because he believes that my name has power, right? And it was effective. So what's the problem here? The problem is that he wasn't one of them. And what does Jesus say? He's like, man, service takes all sorts of forms. It doesn't mean that you just have to be a disciple. Man, it's going to be a really small heaven if it's just the 12 disciples. Right? And what he says here is, whoever gives you a cup of water to drink because you belong to Christ will by no means lose his reward. So Jesus goes, no, you don't even understand. Like, this faith, it doesn't just serve everyone, right? But faith serves in every way, right? Like, in every way. Like, giving a cup of water is service. It's service. Somebody else that's not following it, that's service. So when we look at the disciples and they're trying to put up all these boundaries and trying to define what this role of a Christian looks like and how they ought to act and how they ought to be, and he goes, dude, just, like, if it's in my name, let it go. Let them run. All right. So here's the thing. You know, service takes on a lot of different forms. And however you serve, you know, I think sometimes we put ourselves into these categories where we think, like, you know, my service needs to look and smell like this. Like, this is the role that service is. And I hope you're not thinking right now like serving in the church. I mean, there's a bunch of people back there serving right now. Like, that's one way of serving. There's a lot of different ways of serving. I'll tell you one, and hopefully I don't cry like a baby again. But like on Friday, I'm finishing up. I'm flying back up from Miami. I'm in the airplane, and I'm working on my sermon. And I get a text from Liz Zern. And it's, man, I gotta stop doing this. Joe, help me out, man. Thank you. That's what I need. You know, and it was a Facebook posting video of Matt Chandler, and I posted on my Facebook. If you want to go watch it, it's pretty good. I mean, it's really good, or else I wouldn't be talking about it. And it affected me. And here's why it affected me. One, because it was exactly what this sermon was on. And I'm like, dude, that is ridiculous. Like, I had written this, like, I was finishing up, like, this part of it, and then this comes through, right? Like, and so here's God, and I've talked about this before, like, orchestrating things, Facebook posts for his glory. You know what I mean? Like and it never fails. It's like every week, I kid you not, there is something that's like, man, that is exactly what I'm talking about. And so, like, that's the first reason why it crushes me. The second reason is because that's an act of service. And Liz probably doesn't, I mean, she had no idea I was going to bring this up, so I apologize. But, like, she doesn't even know that, like, she probably didn't even think of that as an act of service, but it is. Sending a text to somebody is an act of service. telling them that you're thinking about them? I mean, there's legitimately, I don't think there's anything more significant than telling somebody that you're thinking about them in like the middle of your day. I've talked about this before, and I got a lot of laughs last time. So, my wife says the same thing. Like, I just want to get a text from you during the day. And I go, it's because I'm not thinking about you. I'm sorry. It's not. I'm just busy. But if I did, I'm saving up. Listen, I have to compartmentalize, okay? Some of you understand why. I do. I just... 17 and a half years. Come on. And I'm saving them up so that they mean a lot. Does that work? And that's the thing. It's like to tell somebody that you're thinking about them. That is so significant. And so when Liz sends me that, and she's like, hey, I'm praying for you and balancing of your time with your family and all that stuff. I'm like, that's cool. That's awesome. And we have prayer doors in the back. And man, every week we've got people writing prayers on there of like, hey, pray for this person and pray for that. And, I just, like, that is service. And so I say this because the disciples here are missing the boat, right? And Jesus is explaining to them that faith has this servant's heart. There's this servanthood principle of faith in trusting in God. If you really trust in God, then you're going to serve. Now, you guys are probably sitting here going, like, this all sounds great. A text is good because it takes me, like, no time because I have a lot of things to do. And to be honest, I don't have a whole lot of time to serve people. Is that the truth? Is that where everybody else is? Because I know that's where I'm at. It comes down to our time. And what Jesus is saying here is that guess who's not responsible for your time? And I'm going to keep hitting this because I think that is the biggest idol in our culture. I don't think it's money. I think it's time. I think we worship our time more than we worship money. And I think it comes down to this service piece. And it's because all of us are sitting here going, I don't have time to serve people. I don't have time to go meet people for coffee. I don't have time to pour into people's lives. I don't have time to join into a community group. I don't have time to do these things. And what Jesus is saying is, that's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to serve. If you trust in God, tangibly, He will work things out. We have like 35 people in this church that are sacrificing their time to be team captains of some sort of ministry or an elder. Today we're going to install Colin as an elder at the end of the service. Like that doesn't come, that's not zero, right? Like there's commitment associated with that. There's time that's associated with that. I didn't have extra time and was like, hey, I know. Let me become a lead pastor, right? Like that's not how this works. This is a sacrifice. And we're going to talk about that in detail next week. But what God is saying here is that if we really trust God, if we really have faith in God, then we are going to be willing to serve, to pour out our lives, to come to the altar, right? And pour out our lives and go, I don't know how you're going to solve this problem. I've got a time problem. But I think we do it. We respond in faith and we serve other people. We serve our friends. We serve our coworkers. We serve people, everybody, in every way that we possibly can think of. And we go, God, I don't know where you're going to make all this stuff up, but I know this is what you want me to do. That's a faith statement, isn't it? And then Jesus drops the hammer, okay? Verse 42, he says, whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a great millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea. Remember, he's got this kid on his lap, and he goes, serve this kid. He's saying, serve everyone. where he says little ones here, don't think of this as just kids. His point is that we're supposed to serve everyone. And if you cause somebody to sin, it would have been better for you to have been dead. You see, what Jesus is doing here is he's elevating this. He's like, this isn't just service for service sake. We're not trying to get like gold stars, get community hours. Like, that's not the point. He's saying that, like, the disciples' actions here were not a servant's heart, right? They were concerned about themselves. They were not concerned about others. And what Jesus says is, like, that attitude, if you cause somebody to sin because of that attitude, it would have been better for you to be dead. That's what happens when you tie a millstone around your neck and throw it in the sea, just in case you guys need that, right? Like, what Jesus is saying is that in two cases, right? One, somebody watches your actions, watches the disciples' actions, arguing over who's the greatest, and they go, if this is what God is like, I want nothing to do with him. If we're vying for ourselves, for recognition, for fame, for where we rack and stack in our neighborhood or at work or whatever, they're going to say, if this is what a follower of Christ looks like, I want nothing to do with Christ. And I think this is where Jesus is saying, like, literally, you're a believer. And I think he's saying this, like, you're a believer. If you cause somebody else to go to hell because they reject me, because of your actions, it really would have been better if you had just gotten out of the way. Now realize there's hyperbole in this, okay? Like he's being, it's kind of like the you must hate your parents to follow me, right? Like he's being overly aggressive, but he's doing so because what he's trying to elevate is the significance of eternity versus the temporal. You see, if we actually cared for other people the way that Jesus does, the way that our Father does, then we're going to care about their eternity. We're going to care about their eternity more than our temporary. I mean, that's martyrdom on a different level, right? That's martyrdom. That's dying to save somebody, right? That's. And if we have an eternal focus in our lives, if we're thinking about everybody else's eternity and how can I serve them to reflect God in a way that is unique and different and that would allow them to see Christ and what he's done for them, if that's the priority in my life and I'm serving people to do that, then I've got this eternal focus, and that's a good thing. But if I go, I don't want to serve them, I'm missing it. The second option, maybe they don't reject God because of our actions, but maybe they get lulled into thinking that our actions are what a disciple of Christ should do, and they just repeat. This is a lot for parents, right? This is, I just saw you do this, Dad. Right? This is where the disciples are stopping this exorcism. They're like, no, you're not with us. You need to be with us. And somebody sees that and they go, okay, yeah, let's do that. Right? And they join in with this Pharisee-like attitude of trying to put bounds on people. And now they make it even more difficult for people to see Christ. And so in both of those ways, Jesus is going, this is significant. You don't understand the eternal ramifications of your actions or your inaction. All right, verse 43. He says, and if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It's better for you to enter life crippled than with two hands to go to hell, to the unquenchable fire. And if your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. It's better for you to enter inner life lame than with 2 feet to be thrown into hell. And if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out. It's better for you to enter the kingdom of God with 1 eye than with 2 eyes to be thrown into hell, where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. This is Jesus going like, you don't understand that your actions, having that servant's heart, it has eternal ramifications. Or likewise, not having a servant's heart may have eternal ramifications. Now, we're talking about how this affects us. I do believe that God is completely sovereign and in control of eternal destinies, right? But there's a role that he wants to use us. We get to be used by God. And so the question is are you allowing him to use you? Are you allowing him to use your time, your energy, your resources to serve other people? Or do you not have time for that? And so the question becomes, what do we do? Here, what he's talking about is like, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Okay, hyperbole again, please. Don't say Jonathan told me to cut off my hand because, right? But if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. What he's saying is the temporal, the here and the now, meaningless. Eternity, eternal significance. They don't even compare. So let me ask you this. What he's saying here is that if your hand is causing you to sin, cut it off. Prior to that, in verse 42, he says, if you do something that causes somebody else to sin, it would have been better for you to be dead. Jesus is connecting these things here. What he's saying is that, what are you willing to do? What are you willing to sacrifice for somebody else? Because that's what service really comes down to. That's what that servant's heart looks like. You see, and that's not our MO, right? That is not American culture. And quite truthfully, it's not the majority of cultures of what are you willing to give up? What in your life are you willing to modify to help somebody else, to serve somebody else? You see, we don't think like that, right? We think, I'm me, you're you, I'll give you the resources, here's the Bible, have at it, right? And if you then don't get this or figure this out, that's a you problem. That's not what a servant's heart says. You see, a servant's heart says, what do I need to modify in my life? What do I need to change? What do I need to get rid of? What do I need to amend? What do I need to do to my life to help you see Christ more clearly? So let me give you a perfect example, and this is a fairly common one, and I'll just say it now so that way everybody, understands how I operate as well. But like alcohol. The Bible does not forbid alcohol. I don't like a lot of alcohol, but I'll drink red wine. Joey's brought that up before, I think. I don't struggle with alcohol. There's no temptation for me there. That's it. But there are for some of you. And that's okay. I mean, it's not okay, but that's okay if it's a struggle. But you know what my job is? It's to not throw gas on that fire. So if you come over to my house and I have alcohol there, I will happily put it away if you're I'm struggling with it. Or if I know that you struggle with it, I'm not going to have it out. That's not hypocrisy, people. You guys get that, right? That's having a servant's heart. That's caring for somebody else. That's saying, you know what, man, I would love to hang out in my pool and drink some sangria. I would love to. But you know what? If you're coming over, and I'm not telling you if you struggle with this, don't come over. But you know what I mean? If you struggle with that, I will happily put that away. I will happily go, no alcohol. I have no problems with that. And none of us should. You see what I mean? But there's this individualistic nature in our lives where we go, I'm going to serve me before I'm going to serve you, and like that's not comfortable for me. I mean, there's all sorts of things. Well, how about social media? What if you knew, this one's going to hurt a little bit. You guys ready? What if you knew that somebody struggled deeply with seeing the highlight reel from other people on social media, and it sent them into a place of depression? Because all they see are the great things that are happening in your life. And they're stuck with the reality of theirs. And they have nothing to brag about on Facebook. Would that change how and what you post? It should. That's like a contemporary one, right? Like that's a tough one. But you go, I can post whatever I want. I've got other friends that, yeah, sure. In Romans 14:13, it's a great passage because Paul does a great job of outlining what that looks like, of like, we are free in Christ. We absolutely are. And what he says is, decide never to put a stumbling block or hindrance in the way of a brother. Choose. Decide to do that. It's a conscious decision. And that's what a servant's heart does. All right, so we're going to end up here at the end. The very end. Verse 49. He says, for everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but if the salt has lost its saltiness, how will you make it salty again? Have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another. That very last line, be at peace with one another. Where did we start this conversation? With the disciples arguing about who was the greatest. And at the end of this thing, Jesus is saying, be at peace with one another. And just to give you some of the background here, salt was used on the sacrifices. And that's what and they would have understood this better than us. I know we're like, salt, fire, what? Like, I don't know what you're talking about. Right? But like what he's saying here is like salt, that salt with fire, that's like you are the sacrifice. So the question is, are you willing to sacrifice in order to serve? And he says the salt is good, but if you lose it, right? Like if you cease being that sacrifice, you're not going to display Christ. You're not going to display the gospel in your life. You're not going to be serving others. You're not going to allow them to see what Christ is like. And that's the entire reason we were created, you guys. Not for comfort, not for success, but for rejection, and suffering, and service. And next week, we're going to see what that sacrifice looks like. It's not easy, you guys. If your life is easy, if you're like, man, this is great, I'd encourage you to just get on your knees for a bit and pray to God and ask Him where He wants to be using you. And if you go back and watch that video from Matt Chandler, it's kind of what he talks about. And he basically tells men, stop going to bed with energy. You should be exhausted. And he's applying that for everybody, but he's like, you know, if you're coming home at the end of your day and you're going, man, I've spent it all and I'm done and it's time for me to unplug. Or if you're a wife and you have kids and you've been dealing with the kids and the house and maybe work too, and you go, man, I'm done. And instead of pouring into your kids, instead of shepherding your kids' hearts, you unplug. And you watch TV and you play video games. And you just go, hey, I need to relax some. I need my time. I need to recharge. See if God will not bless you in that. And if you're single, if you're a young guy, if you're a teenager, young kid, what are you doing with your time? I don't even remember what I did with all my time. I don't know. Are there like adults in the room? Like, Melissa and I were just talking about this. Like, when we first got married, we're like, what did we do? Like, I have no idea what we did all day. So if you're in that, if you're a teenager, if you're a student, if you're young, single, dating, like, what are you doing with your time? Are you serving other people? Are you trying to find ways to serve people, to serve God, to serve Christ? Or are you just feeding into the culture that says, I need comfort, I need to relax, I need to unplug? Is it about you, or is it about him? See if God will not just open up the floodgates and bless you. Would you pray with me?